Hello, my name is Ashley Simmons. Today I'm going to discuss the Worldcom scandal and how this largely successful company crumbled due to poor corporate governance. Founded in 1983, Worldcom was created in a coffee shop in Hattiesburg, Mississippi by Bernard Ebbers. Worldcom would go on to become the second largest long-distance phone company in the United States. Not only were they in the telephone business, but WorldCom also handled worldwide internet data traffic. WorldCom provided mission-critical communication services for tens of thousands of businesses around the world, carried more international voice traffic than any other company, carried a significant amount of world's internet traffic, owned and operated a global internet protocol backbone that provided connectivity in more than 2,600 cities and in more than 100 countries, and owned and operated 75 data centers on 5 continents. Growth through acquisition was certainly how WorldCom was able to accomplish so much in so little amount of time. The growth through acquisition strategy at WorldCom was enforced and reinforced by top management. The consistent pressures from top management created an aggressive and competitive culture. 1991 through 1997, WorldCom spent $60 billion in 65 acquisitions and accumulated $41 billion in debt. Acquisitions with MFS Communications allowed WorldCom to obtain UUNet, which gave them the largest providers of business and consumer telephone services. In 1997, WorldCom's stock raised from pennies per share to over $60 a share. Within 6 years, WorldCom had a lot on their plate. Looking at this as an outsider, it would appear that WorldCom had several challenges, including maintaining financial aspects of their acquisitions. In 1997, WorldCom outbid British Telecommunication Corporation for MCI Communications, agreeing to pay $35 billion. Implementing this new organization into a functioning business would be their next task, which with any new task takes time and planning. Due to poor business governance, WorldCom struggled to integrate companies. WorldCom files for bankruptcy. By May of 2002, Bernie Ebbers resigned from his CEO position at WorldCom. 2 months following this, WorldCom declared the largest bankruptcy in American history. You might ask how this happened to such a successful company. The lack of corporate governance and ethical decision-making played a major role in WorldCom's destruction. Operating expenses must be subtracted from revenue immediately, but the capital expenses can be spread over a period of time. WorldCom improperly spread operating expenses over time, which in turn inflated their profits. An example of this would be if I purchased a car. This car would be an asset and would be capitalized. The fuel it takes to operate this car would be an expense because it is being used and I cannot use it again in the future. This fuel decreases my income, but if I wanted to cheat the system, I can mark the fuel down as an asset. This is what WorldCom did, but in their case, they capitalized their long-distance line cost. The question we must ask in this case is, how did WorldCom get away with this scandal? How did WorldCom hide $3.8 billion in expenses? Former CFO Scott D. Sullivan created a strategy that improperly accounted for $3.8 billion. Sullivan's strategy was to book operating costs, like basic network maintenance, as capital investments. This allowed Worldcom to hide expenses, inflate its cash flow, and report profits instead of losses. As a result, as well as reporting long-distance line costs as assets, Sullivan failed to provide the auditor, Arthur Anderson, with accounting techniques they were using. Scott Sullivan was fired shortly after the discovery. As a result of this scandal, Scott D. Sullivan was not only fired but also sentenced to 5 years in prison. Former CEO Bernie Ebbers was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Sullivan was charged with conspiracy, securities fraud, and making false filings. There are many ethical issues in this case that were influenced by groupthink. Groupthink is caused when concurrent seeking becomes paramount in decision making. In this case, CEO Bernie Ebbers was aware of the accounting practices they were performing. Although Scott Sullivan explained it was wrong to practice the accounting techniques, Bernie Ebbers insisted that they needed to meet their numbers. Reporting expenses as assets to meet their numbers was just one of the unethical practices they performed. The Worldcom scandal negatively impacted the corporate world. Following this scandal, Congress passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. This act introduced a new set of business regulations. This act passed to ensure things like this do not happen again in the future. Another case of corporate fraud is the Enron scandal. Enron was founded in 1986 and was involved with the gas industry. During the dot-com boom, Enron decided they could build on their international presence by becoming a leader in the water industry. Like WorldCom, Enron began taking on more than they could fund. To fix this issue, Enron secretly created off-balance sheet financing vehicles. The use of mark-to-market valuation on contracts produced artificially large earnings, disguising for some years underlying poor profitability in major parts of the business. Enron was not generating cash flow because they were spending on expansion. In late 2001, suspicions grew that Enron's earnings were being manipulated. It emerged that the CFO had privately made himself rich at Enron's expense through off-balance sheet vehicles. Enron filed for bankruptcy, which was the largest in American history until Worldcom's case. Overall, it is important to recognize the issues in corporate fraud cases because they teach us a valuable lesson. Basic business accounting and ethics classes should be required to run a billion-dollar company to ensure stability in the corporate community. Although sometimes people ignore doing the right thing, it could really save a business in the long run.